Look, I was going to open this video by saying if a tree falls in the woods, but you get it, right? You have a podcast and you're worried that nobody can find it, that no one is hearing it. So, what do you do to get people to find your podcast? After all, around 30 to 40% of people discover podcasts through the native app searches. And if you're not using the right words and phrases that people are using, then they're not going to find your show. So today, I'm going to show you how to optimize your podcast and episodes for search to attract the right listeners and grow your audience faster. Hey everybody, I'm Joe Casabona. I'm the evangelist here at RSS.com, and we care deeply about helping podcasters get found. We offer a number of tools to extend your reach, but today we're going to get into the good old basics. Here's the outline for what we're going to cover. I'll tell you how you can optimize your podcast name to be found, how to work the description in just the right way. We'll cover episode titles and descriptions. We'll talk about underrated levers, and then we'll talk about how you can leverage external sources to help your podcast get found. Let's start with the name of your podcast. This creates the first impression for your show. It's the first SEO signal, and it should be clear, specific, and searchable. Clear over clever. Because if your title doesn't align with your audience and their expectations, no one's going to find it. So you should think about what your unique value proposition is. Who is your podcast for, and what problem does it solve? If you're not optimizing for those things, then there's no chance your target audience is ever going to find your show. So you should avoid vague names that don't tell people what the show is about, and instead be super clear. Think about the keywords. This is going to come up a lot, but what are the keywords that you're trying to rank for or be found for? If you have a show about cooking, then you should use cooking, or even better, if it's cooking for families, then it should be cooking for families. So let's look at a couple of good names and then a bad one. Cooking feasts for big families, right? This is clear. It has a clear audience. The topic is obvious. Freelance writing for beginners. This is, again, search friendly. It's beginner focused. If someone is getting into freelance writing, this is probably the exact phrase they're searching for. But the hustle pod, well, that's vague. What is the hustle? Is pod podcast, or is it like a little thing that you sit in? The is not a useless word, but it's a word that takes up space. And so you don't want to use that. So again, clear is better than clever. Let's look at podcast description now. Your description helps both listeners and search engines understand your show. And the first two lines are crucial. When you're searching in a podcast app, you see the title, you see the artwork, and then you see probably the first two lines. Those two lines need to entice the potential listener into clicking to read more. And so again, that term keywords is going to come up. What are the search terms related to your niche? Cooking for big families, freelance writing tips, how to start a podcast. These are the things that people are going to be searching for. And so your description needs to address those things. And like I said, the first two lines are crucial. So what are the questions your description should answer? 1, what is the podcast about? 2, who is it for? And 3, what value does it provide? When people are looking for a show, they're looking to answer one question. What's in it for me? If you can't answer that question in the description, they're going to move on to a show that can. So here's an example of a good description. Want to start freelance writing but don't know where to begin? Freelance writing for beginners helps you land your first client. improve your writing, and build a steady income all from home. Answers a question. If the person says yes, they're going to keep reading. Then they learn who it's for and the benefits of it. I once was told by somebody that you should never start a paragraph with a question because people can say no to the question. I think that is the exact wrong approach. You want people to say no to that question because you want them to self select out. You don't want your show to be for everyone. You want your show to be for a specific niche and audience. And so, starting with a question where the person reading says yes means that they are the type of person you're talking to, and that will benefit your show in the long run. Okay, so now let's look at episode titles. We hear this on YouTube all the time that titles and thumbnails matter, and it's true. 80% of listeners decide whether to listen or watch based on the title alone. And I know what you're thinking. I put a ton of time and effort into this episode, and the title is the thing that's going to matter. But think about it. If you see two boxes and one is perfectly wrapped with the most beautiful wrapping paper and the most perfect bow, and it's up on a shelf, and then you see a box that is crumbled and broken and covered in mud and dirt and on the floor, which one are you going to go for? The crumbled box could have $1,000 in it, and the beautiful box could have a rock in it, but the packaging matters. And so you want to pick a good title because that is what people are going to use to figure out if they should listen to your episode. Because the truth is that they're going to invest a bunch of time into listening, and they want to make sure it's good. So, good episode titles. Be specific, descriptive, and use those keywords that people are searching for. And you want to avoid clickbait, right? In our package example, even beautiful packaging, if there was garbage in the box, you're probably never going to trust the person who brought you that package again, right? So you want to avoid clickbait. You want your episode to deliver on the title and the promise. That said, you also want to open a curiosity loop, right? Again, you want people to click through. You want them to start thinking. So let's look at a few good headlines. How to write catchy headlines for blogs. This is a clear problem and solution. This isn't clickbait because we're telling you how you can write catchy headlines. The clickbait would be how to get 100 times more traffic to your blog by just tweaking your headline. That is clickbait because we can't possibly deliver on that promise. But how to write catchy headlines for blogs, well, that's something that we can help you with. The same thing with the next title, maximizing your podcast reach on social media. This is a tactical benefit. Again, we're not saying how to 10x your podcast downloads with social media. We're telling you things you can do on social media to maximize your reach. There's a clear problem and a benefit. And then here's an example of a bad title, episode 14, A Chat with Jane Doe. Unless we already know who Jane Doe is and what she does, there's no possible way for us to know what we're going to get out of this episode. And including the episode number in the beginning, that's largely irrelevant information. Unless you have a serial podcast where the order really matters, and then I would maybe, if you're going to put it in the title, put it at the end. Because we have precious little space in the podcast apps. And if we're signaling to Google, because our episodes are going to show up in Google, we want the beginning of the title to be the most important stuff. So again, A Chat with Jane Doe, maybe if this was a celebrity that or an athlete that everybody knows, and you'd want to put their name at the beginning. So, Derek Jeter, a chat with one of the most famous Yankee captains of all time, right? Whatever, right? That is clear. And if people know who Derek Jeter are, they're going to want to listen. Okay. So now let's get into episode descriptions and show notes. And let's start with, the description. First two lines are crucial. I said that earlier, right, about podcast description. It's just as important for the episode description because if someone's searching and they see the title maximize your podcast reach on social media, they are going to want to know what you talk about. And so the first two lines, just like with the podcast description, are prime real estate. You want to make sure that you are optimizing those two lines because that's what people are going to see first. And if you don't hook them with the first two lines, then there's no possible way that they're going to want to learn more about the show. So here's what you should include in your podcast description. I would say start with a question or curiosity statement. It doesn't always have to be a question, right? Are you struggling to grow your podcast on social media? It could be a curiosity statement like social media has gone downhill in the last few years, right? That gets the people thinking, why? Or it's gotten a lot harder to grow your podcast on social media in the last few years. Oh, why is that, right? Then you want to have a quick summary of what listeners will learn. You want to include those relevant keywords, but you want to naturally integrate them, right? You don't just want to say you don't just want to stuff a bunch at the end. You want to make sure that it is keywords integrated into the sentences of the description. And then you also want to have a call to action. Subscribe, visit your website, follow, or whatever, right? Because people are going to see that and they're going to want to learn more. So start with a question or curiosity statement, have a quick summary, relevant keywords, call to action. Do not start the description within this episode. All right. That breaks our cardinal rule of the first two lines matter. If people are looking for a podcast episode, they already know it's an episode. So let's look at a good description, right? Struggling to write a compelling headline. All right, great. This is a curiosity statement. Then we have in this episode, we share 5 easy techniques to craft headlines that grab attention and get clicks. Okay, I know exactly what we're getting here. Whether you're blogging, podcasting, or posting on social media, these tips will help your content stand out. Problem, solution, curiosity. And again, we are signaling that this is an episode, but it's not the first thing we're opening up with. So we are opening that curiosity loop immediately and then telling people what they're going to get. Okay, so those are the big ones, right? Podcast title, podcast description, episode title, episode description. Those 4 things, if you optimize those, you will make big gains in your growth because you are making it easier for people to find. So if you're looking at this list and you're wondering where should I start with those. I would say the name, you have your name, but if your show's not growing, consider renaming it. All right. And if you want to know the best process for how to rename a podcast, comment on this video. Let us know. We'll make a video and a blog post and we'll let you know the best way. I personally have renamed most of my podcasts at some point or another. So, name, description. I'll also tell you in a minute how you can tweak your name without doing a full rename. But description, episode titles, episode descriptions, work with those, experiment with those. You can change your description regularly. I would say don't change it every day, but change it for a month, see how it does, and make tweaks that way. So those are the core 4, we'll say. The next 2 are, I would say, underrated, maybe hidden levers, and we're going to just kind of run through these really quickly. So, hidden levers, category. Your category matters, right? If you have a podcast about personal finance, there's business in general, but that's really broad, right? Try one of the subcategories of business, right? Like investing or careers or something like that, right? Whatever fits closest. Think about the 2 or 3 topics or 2 or 3 categories of topics that you cover on your show and find the right category. I have seen people change the category and see growth because they start charting for that category. So I've tried a bunch of different categories for my show, especially since I rebranded it. And I have found that technology is probably the best category for it. Even though it's for solopreneurs, even though it's for solopreneurs spending time, we leverage technology to save time in my main show. And so technology is the best category there. You also want to leverage metadata, right? So this is like additional information associated with the show. If tags are available on a particular podcast platform, maybe use those. But I think one of the best ways that is completely underrated is the host or author field. You don't need to just put your name or the name of the show again. Definitely don't do that, right? You can put your name and then your title. So, like Joe Casabona, RSS.com evangelist, Joe Casabona, podcast coach, right? That way, if people search podcast coach or RSS.com, our shows are more likely to show up because the term is in the metadata. And then the tagline. The tagline for your show. This could be, if we have a show called freelance writing for beginners, we can add a colon and say uh, tips to get your writing career off the ground, right? Or tips to become a writer people want to hire, right? That allows us to add a little bit more context to the title. It allows us to add keywords that isn't a like keyword stuffing smarmy tactic, and it allows us to give people a fuller picture of what the show is about. So I would strongly recommend adding some of those hidden levers. So let's look at a quick example here. When you search for automate, my podcast Streamline Solopreneur shows up in the first 12, right? Depending on how you can, I would say that this is number 7. But if you're counting up and down, it's number 2. I think it's probably across though. Anyway, the show is called Streamline Solopreneur. But the fact that I have a tagline, tips to help solopreneurs automate their business, means I'm ranking really high for that keyword, even though it's not in the actual like proper title of my show. Similarly, one of my other shows, Podcast Workflows Live, a show where I take advantage of RSS.com's live item tag so that we can live stream directly to the platform. I have Joe Casabona, RSS.com evangelist and podcast coach. So if people search RSS.com, it's likely that this show is going to show up because we have that right in the title. So you definitely want to leverage things like that, the tagline and the author field. Now, there's one more thing that I want to talk about, and it's external sources. So in SEO, backlinks are a really important thing, but you're not necessarily getting great backlinks to your podcast, especially if people are just linking to Apple Podcasts, which is still only on Apple platforms at the time of this recording. RSS.com gives you a great website for your show that people can link to, but people are more likely to link to the platform. So how do you leverage external sources? Well, you still want to have a website for your podcast because that's what Google is going to search. That's what Google is going to crawl. And so all of the tips that we talked about in this video so far will be amplified if you do it for your show and then have a website for your show. And again, luckily, RSS.com automatically gives you a great website. You also want to leverage YouTube. Look, YouTube is the second biggest search engine. People are looking for content there all the time, and YouTube is putting a concerted effort into podcasts. And so if you add your episodes to YouTube with search-friendly titles, then it gives you another place for your show to be found. And finally, you could have blog posts about your episodes. And I know what you're thinking, Joe, that is a lot of work. Writing is hard. Producing a podcast is already hard. Well, if you take the transcripts and you summarize it and you tweak it just a little bit, you have a blog post about the episode. And so you can effortlessly put your audio episodes, convert them to video, and upload them to YouTube with RSS.com. We have our PodViz technology that will take your audio only episode and create an engaging video. It's not just going to be a static image and the audio. There's going to be waveforms, and if you use custom chapter artwork or chapter markers, that's all going to get converted and put over to YouTube. So that is a slam dunk win for getting your show over on YouTube without creating any extra work for you. But the other thing that we do is generate transcripts for free on any of the paid plans. So then you can take that transcript and turn it into a blog post. And now you are covered for a bunch of external sources. So we just covered a lot of ground here. We talked about your podcast name and description, your episode titles and episode descriptions, underrated levers like picking the right category, updating your author name and using other metadata, and adding a tagline to your podcast name to add some more context. And I showed you some proof of that too, right? Automate is not part of my podcast name, but I put it in the tagline and it's ranking higher in Apple Podcast search. And then leveraging external sources like YouTube, like your website, and using transcripts to turn your episode into a blog post, which RSS.com gives you all the tools to use those external sources easily. If you have any questions about optimizing your show for search engines, SEO for your podcast, leave a comment down below. If you liked this video, be sure to like it and subscribe to this channel. My name is Joe Casabona. I'm the evangelist here at RSS.com, and I can't wait to see how you use these tips to grow your podcast. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you out there.